Hi there, I'm Nick and I'm autistic and I also have ADHD. And if you're a regular viewer, you'll notice that I finally got rid of the pink hair. Today's topic is common comorbidities that occur with autism. Now, this is one of those slightly more informative videos that I'm going to try and do here, so it'll probably be a little bit less chatty, and I might glance away from the screen a little bit. I'm trying, but, it's hard work. So, both autism and ADHD are quite difficult to diagnose because both of them have elements that cross over with certain more common mental health conditions. So it's really hard for doctors to nut it out, particularly when you've got people like myself who don't necessarily present in the way that doctors expect autistic people to present. Making things even more difficult is that a person can be autistic and struggle with common mental or physical health conditions. For example, it's thought, although expert opinion varies greatly here, that between 30 and 80% of autistic people also have ADHD. OCD is apparently also very common amongst the autistic population. Around 26 or 27% of autistic adults also suffer from depression versus 10% of the general population. Now that is a huge difference. That should be up there as one of the little flags. About 30% of us have comorbid anxiety disorders. It's generally thought that about 11% of autistic adults also have schizophrenia versus 2% of the general population. That's a massive difference again. 7% versus 0.5% for bipolar disorder. And yet we're often misdiagnosed as being bipolar. Now, on top of the additional mental health struggles a lot of us have, I personally struggle with major anxiety, panic disorder, agoraphobia, and apparently complex trauma. But autistic people have higher incidences of other conditions too. About 30% of us suffer from epilepsy versus 2 to 3% of the general populace. We're also more prone to neurological disorders and migraines. I have always been a migraine sufferer. Sleep disorders, this is a huge one. A huge percentage of people with autism and or ADHD really struggle with insomnia. There's a school of thought that thinks that there's a melatonin problem, that we can't produce enough of the sleep chemical melatonin. You can buy it in tablet form, but it is really expensive. I tried it once. It did help a little, but it's not something I can afford to continue. Gastrointestinal issues. This one really did surprise me because I've always struggled in this area, and I've given up. I gave up years ago going to the GP and asking for help. I'm having all these problems, and they're just like, well, we can't see what it is. We can't just change your diet. Are you drinking too much, or do you do drugs? Are you eating too many beans? Legumes, or you don't appear to have other flags for stuff, but I have all sorts of problems, and just end up suffering in silence. This actually affects 43 to 84% of the autistic population. 43 to 84% of us have gastrointestinal issues. That's massive. Why aren't these things looked into? I think I need to take these stats to my GP and try again. What do you reckon? Autistic people tend to develop more allergies than others. They tend to have more food sensitivities and preferences, and unfortunately that in a lot of cases can lead to diabetes. We also have a far greater risk of developing cardiovascular disease than the general population. Autistic people have more autoimmune disorders, and there's a fair percentage that actually have genetic disorders to contend with too, such as Down syndrome. That all these complex combined conditions are generally outside of the realm of our poor, overworked and underappreciated GPs. All of this gets farmed out to all these different specialists if you keep pushing and pushing and pushing. But surely by now there is enough research out there that links so many of these conditions. I think it is time that a compulsory module for neurodiversity, including this whole range of other issues that we struggle with alongside autism, ADHD, dyslexia, etc., was developed, and that all students taking medical degrees had to complete this module as a compulsory module. It is time to end the standard "you can't be autistic, you can make eye contact" attitude. Because being a late diagnosed autistic person with several of the above comorbid conditions who's been screaming for help for years and getting classified as a hypochondriac, nah. We need to update the system. We need to break through to our first point of call. GPs need to be taught this from the beginning. It's going to really help them as well as their patients. Thank you for your time. Be well.